Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Lori, and welcome to Universally Unique, exploring the neurodiverse world of the extraordinary. This podcast fosters curiosity and understanding about neurodiversity while empowering individuals with tools for acceptance and inclusion in classrooms, the workplace, and communities. Featuring shared stories of neurodiverse life experiences, it sheds light on navigating a world not designed for diversity. Universally Unique starts now. Hi, this is Dr. Lori. Welcome to Universally Unique. My guest today is Robert Marshall, and we'll spend some time talking about Robert's neurodiverse journey. But before we do that, we're going to get started taking 3 box breaths. As you may have noticed, my voice is not its normal voice for anybody who's familiar with the podcast. So I am going to just count the 3. If you would count your own breaths, we're going to breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, and then do another breath. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. Hopefully everyone feels a little moment of relaxation. I like to remind everybody that just 3 breaths is always a good way to kind of re-ground yourself, especially when something is a little too busy, a little too overstimulating, or maybe a little too annoying. And then it's also good at other times. So we're going to start. Robert's going to give us a little overview of his journey with his neurodiverse diagnosis, which is, I think, um, not a completely unusual one, but one that at a different point in time, maybe now would be considered to be a little bit more unusual. But um, since Robert is an adult, um, he was probably in school during a period of time in which people did not necessarily recognize what was going on. So, Robert, if you would kind of give us an overview of your journey.
Yeah, thanks. Robert Marshall, I was born and raised in London. I like to say that's why this comes out this. It's very confusing for some people, but it'll bear with me. I've been here in the US for 14 years now. I am a life coach right now. I work with professionals and help them achieving the jobs of their dreams. Um, my journey has been really interesting because, as you mentioned, I was a late diagnosis. And so at the age of, I think, 48, my wife suggested like, hey, I think you should get this checked out and see whether you are ADHD. And I think that's after years of her taking on a lot of the executive function and realizing that there was something there that could help another boost. And so at the age of 48, I met with a prescriber and went through the testing, and they realized that I was ADHD. And for me, it was such uh, it was an unlock. It was a key in the lock. As I look back to lots of points previously in my life and wondering things about myself, the ADHD became the answer and the reason, and most importantly, not an excuse. I think that's really
Mhm.
important to say.
Yeah. I think when you and I've spoken before, you described that you would be extremely successful in certain situations, and then there were things that you were having an incredible difficulty with, and you couldn't understand why.
Exactly. And I fully look back, and it's actually one of the most interesting things I think about my journey from uh, corporate global, be it America or Holland or the US. Um, was this moment in my journey where I went from working in corporate for 25 to 30 years and moved to being a solo entrepreneur. And then suddenly I found that like all of the guardrails that I created for myself like no longer worked. So, for example, I worked in project management, and I've worked in project management since I was younger. Before that, I worked in software engineering. I feel many folks sort of fall into something in very engineering or technical tasks.
Mhm.
So I started out as a software engineer, then moved into project management because I had the skill, the superpower of having, 100 different conversations a day with 100 different people, but still being able to keep track of all that information in my head. And what I did was I crafted a working life where I would spend, my 9 to 5 talking with people, working with people, collaborating, meeting, all that good stuff. And then I would do my stuff from 5 till 10, for instance. So I do spreadsheets, I do documents, I do anything like that afterwards. I really batch things up into kind of, this sort of crazy frequent time and then a more quiet solo time.
Which, 5 to 10 is typically the time that one would spend with maybe perhaps their spouse or their
Exactly.
children.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that I'm sure took you away from them or took you to, your home office and closing the door kind of thing. So I suspect there's a lot of things that you were not available to be part of.
Well, exactly. I was fortunate, and again, I think being at such a late stage diagnosis that I was already towards the end of my corporate career when I found out. So I was at the point where you could work a 9 to 5, or you wouldn't be expected weekends, that kind of thing. I was a vice president at both Fox and the New York Times, working in project and program management, running their teams, and so it was great, except for maybe, a little time shifting to work with the folks out in LA. The timing became normal, but it was really a case of like, I trained myself to work in this way because it worked best for me. Right.
Mhm.
And it was just instinctive at that point. No one had sort of said, like, okay, so you are an introvert, extrovert, I think the ability to have 100 conversations is very dependent on your ability to keep that information and then to also make every meeting feel like you're bringing your full new self to that meeting. And so I become
Sounds
adaptable about
exhausting.
myself. Well, that's the thing, is that I didn't find it exhausting. I found it really stimulating
Oh,
because, yeah, I was very fortunate. I worked at a company called ADHD, AKQA, when I was younger. I worked at,
which
yeah,
probably maybe was ADHD, right?
yeah, maybe a little fallout, but AKQA in London, it's a global digital advertising agency, and it is and was full of the smartest people that I've ever met. So it was super exciting working there because people were problem solvers. And so as a problem solver myself, I could literally just jump in and then help them define, okay, well, what is this problem you're dealing with? How do we solve it? Okay, great, leave. And then someone else can you go and do the same thing and the same thing again. And so there really wasn't I think it would not have worked for me if I wasn't ADHD, because I think it would have been tired. I think it would have been, cumulative. I'd have been like, oh, what a
Mhm.
heavy day. But genuinely, I can come out of my last conversation of the day as fresh as I can come out of my first conversation of the day.
Oh,
If the folks are interesting, if the story's there, if there's a problem to solve, if there's something to get my teeth into.
I'm wondering what would happen though if the people weren't interesting. They couldn't have all been interesting.
Okay, yeah, well, no, that was the thing that, well, because at that point I was also younger, so like work-life balance was about having fun, and we would work late and then we'd all go out and have fun. So I think it was the whole thing fit in lifestyle-wise and everything. And as I got older and older, and as I, got married and had kids, there was a lot more focus on work-life balance and being home for the back end of the day and being done at the end of the day and leaving it behind.
Yeah, which I think, work-life balance is such a challenge for everyone. And oftentimes I think younger professionals are really pushed to, you're supposed to give up everything. But I'm seeing a trend now with younger professionals who are really fighting for that balance in a way that probably folks from previous generations didn't. If you want me to work 16 hours a day, I'll work 16 hours a day. You want me to work 20 hours a day, I'll work 20 hours a day. Now people are like, I think a normal shift is, 8 or 9 hours. And then I'm going home or I'm going to do whatever things folks do.
That's
um,
very interesting.
that are
It's very
fun.
interesting. Yeah, you're right. I think it's very interesting because just thinking about the fact that, I think everything's become a lot more transparent. Wages have become transparent, roles have become transparent. Um, so I think genuinely, in the game of capitalism, it's become a real question now. It's like, well, why should I work 16 hours? Right. And then there should be an answer to that, right? When I was younger, why should I work 16 hours? It was because I was paid well. I was working in a truly exciting environment, a very innovative work with a lot of other young people at that time. And as I said, we had we had fun work-life balance.
Yeah.
And so that was great. I feel like if I'd grown older in that space and I'd said like, okay, well, what have you done for me lately? I need the balance to be better. I need the balance to be different. Then the game of capitalism says, okay, well, then you need to go to a job that makes less money, right?
Hmm.
Or you need
Yeah.
to go, or you go to a job with less benefits.
Yeah.
That's what we see a lot in the game of capitalism is that a job where they expect you to spend so much time, they're going to have great benefits. I always
Yeah.
think, there's going to be a ping pong table in the break room and you've the best coffee you could ever have. And then if you have a solid 9 to 5 working life, often the balance then is like less salary and less perks.
Yeah.
So
But
it's
I
like,
would suspect more health challenges probably for some of those folks. Yeah. So did you find that there were things that, as you kind of reflect back, that people did not understand about you, that if you knew that you had ADHD, even if you weren't going to share that information with them, you would have understood why they were perceiving you in a particular way?
yeah, I think specifically to like my younger life, and even then up to into my sort of late 30s when I met my partner, was like keys and wallets. I have been through so many keys, so many wallets. I would say, that I've never had a pair of keys that I couldn't lose. And it was annoying. It was consistent. Because I was, again, it's just natural with my brain. It's just I put something down and it's gone. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very reflective of the people around me. I remember when I was working over in the US, we were working on a really big pitch for work, and people would come up to me and they'd be like, "Hey, here's your wallet," and they'd be like, "Okay, here's your pad, here's your something else," because I would literally be moving around and in the moment so much that being fully in it, and then people just would realize it. So it's just a funny thing around the office. They're like, "I found Robert's wallet. Here you go. I found Robert's."
Well, it's so nice that they gave it back, and especially losing your keys these days would probably be quite expensive, especially since most of the cars have some kind of fancy key now at this point. It's not so easy to replace.
Right, exactly. So, and we have these tools now. So, I use Tile. I know there's also, the Apple Air things as well that you can use,
Yep.
Air tags. So, I mean, I swear by Tile. I've had one for 10 years now. I have one on my keys. I have one in my cell phone. Sorry, I have one on my keys. I have one in my wallet, and they both ring my cell phone if I double click them. So I love Tiles.
So as long as you don't lose your cell phone, you're okay.
Exactly, exactly. And then you can reverse engineer because if you double click your tile on your keys, it'll ring your phone.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
good. That's good.
yeah,
As long
yeah.
as you don't lose all three of them at the same time, you're golden.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
What it would be a tragedy. And then the second thing was that's less of a tool, but when I worked with my wife, who's not neurodivergent, she said, because then she's watching you, right? She's watching you as you go about the life. She's like, you leave the house 3 times. I'm like, yep. I leave and I think, oh, do I have my keys? Oh, do I have my wallet? Oh, do I have, something else? And then I think about that when I've left the house. So it's always going back and going forth and going back and going forth. So for her, that was great to kind of watch and then go, this is confusing, but why don't you put a dish by the door and then put your keys and your wallet in the dish by the door? And then, ipso facto, 12, 13 years later, I haven't lost keys or my wallet in 12 years because of the dish by the door method with my wife and because I have a tile for everything else.
Well, I mean, what a simple solution too. And I think sometimes, depending upon whether it's an educator or whether it's an employer or whether even a family member, sometimes people think that the solution has to be like super complicated. And
Right.
sometimes the simplest solution is actually the best one, or at least you should start with the simplest and least expensive solution before you move on to the most complicated, most expensive thing.
Right, exactly, exactly. Otherwise, I mean, and it does happen that I do, fall into the tool trap. But I think the ones that I've got are pretty good and do work for me. So pretty
Well, in
happy.
the scheme of assistive technology, the tile is like a fairly low tech kind of thing, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
You don't have a robot or anything that's like running around picking things up after you. So
right.
it sounds like your wife has really been a driving force. Is she like your biggest champion, or were there other folks that you would say kind of were, cheering you on in different
Uh,
ways?
yeah, I mean, it started early in life. I had tried to get into the best secondary school or the best in London, tried to get into the best school in my area. And it was it was challenging to do so. And so my mum, who was a great champion for me and worked with a teacher to basically petition the local school, multiple times, like, hey, let's get this kid in here, let's get in here. I was raised by a single mom, and so I'm sure on paper I didn't look as appealing as everybody else. Um, but she was probably my first champion that made an impact on my life because she was like, hey, this guy is great, his family structure is great, he's fully supported, and he's really smart. So that's been great. And then I think I've had a number of mentors uh, throughout my career who've also been really good champions as well, who have sort of really able to help me with the emotional regulation side as well, um, because I have that implicit fairness side of ADHD, right? Like as long as it is all fair, as long as everybody gets a fair shake, I'm fine. It's when I feel like people don't get a fair shake, then I step up and I step in. And what was great was I had a series of mentors or working partners who could see me emotionally react to something I didn't find was fair, and they'd give me the space to deal with it. It'd be like,
Hmm.
okay, great, okay, and now what do we do? And I'd be like, great, back to problem solving. I've said my piece. I've done this thing. Let's do it. And
Yeah.
so just I'm really grateful to all of those folks.
And I think that emotional regulation is a piece that we oftentimes we don't teach children how to do that.
Right.
And then we get annoyed with them when they don't have that skill set. So I give your mentors a great deal of, you know, praise for recognizing that they needed to give you some space. It may just be 5 or 10 minutes of you getting to say a bunch of stuff that you needed to say, and then you can move on. But if you
Right.
didn't get that space, then you're carrying that and it's going to come out in some other way.
Exactly, exactly. And as they knew, it would be so hard to do problem solving, right? You know what I mean? It's so hard to get into problem solving with folks if you have an emotional blocker. And it's something I have two kids, a young girl and a young boy, of 6 and 8. And it's very interesting with them because we talk about emotional regulation in our house. And so we talk
Hmm.
about like, are we emotionally regulated? And uh am walking that line between being a parent with ADHD, with children with suspected ADHD, of like, how can I show them what I've learned, and then how can I also keep reflecting to myself the learnings I get as I go. Like one of the simple things is probably sorry about that. One of the simple things is that just to be able to like talk about meditation with my daughter, and then she's like, I don't know how to calm down, I don't know how to be in this moment, I don't know how to manage. She does really well by us saying like, do you want to meditate, do you want to go to your room, do you want to read? And I think maybe because of RSJ she won't want to go to a room on her own, but
Hmm.
she'll body double like a champion. So
Yeah.
that she's fantastic for that.
Well, I was going to ask you this question. If I was going to ask if you were willing to share this information, but it sounds like you are kind of keeping an eye on the children and wondering whether they're on the same road as dad, which
Right,
is very
exactly.
common.
Very, very common. It's just, you've got to go through I think the 5 phases of grief. You know what I mean? And by that, I hope everyone has understanding is that what you're grieving is the image that you have in your head for how life could be and how great and easy it could be for your kids, and then grieving that, right,
Yeah.
to some degree, with the fact that, it's like it's you're you're angry, you're
Yeah.
sad, you're upset, it's very difficult to think, I have this, truly beautiful, amazing kid, right? And then the phasing in the mind is like, I have this beautiful, amazing kid, but they're neurodivergent. And as you go through it, as you get to it, it's like, no, I have this amazing, beautiful kid who is neurodivergent.
Yeah.
It becomes, the two things follow and flow. And so you're like, okay, so I'm now in that phase where I'm like, okay, if it happens, it happens. It's also like an exam question, because I think that, my daughter exhibits, female symptoms. She is incredibly sensitive. She uh, is, quite easily distracted. Where my son is the opposite. So he is, very intense, but he is very hyper focused. He's like very well hyper and he move around. So he'll move around a
Hmm.
lot, a bunch, to a bunch of things, and then he will zero in on something and won't want to finish it until it ends. And
Yeah.
so it's really interesting looking at that, because you're kind of going, that symptom is me, that symptom is me, but then that symptom's me and that symptom's me. They're not the same, and makes it a little bit harder to diagnose when you're home.
Yeah. Well, and there is one type of ADHD that is a combination of both. And most people have characteristics from both. But what you have actually described is what oftentimes happens is boys are moving around a lot more. There's a lot more motor things happening, and girls are more like, oh, look at the butterfly outside the window, and they look like they're daydreaming all the time. Um,
Right, right, exactly. I think we as a I think it's really interesting, when people think about, has there been an explosion of diagnoses? But I think that when we talk to educators, they're not there. It's like, okay, then there is a new way of speaking about this, but we have been dealing with this for years.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
Certainly great educators. My wife's aunt used to be a principal in Chicago, and I'd say to her, like, "Is this new? Is this like, frantic?" And she's like, "No, no, no. This has been going on for a long time, but now what's happening is identification and support."
yeah,
You're like,
yeah.
"Okay, great, and identification and support."
And I think when you and I spoke, you had a, I would say, primarily successful educational experience. I remember you telling me that when you got to the end of things and there was time for an exam, you got kind of that didn't work out so well. But
Yeah,
overall, you were doing pretty well in school. So even if I brought you to the current day, you might be overlooked because one of the things that people oftentimes are looking for is a kid who's struggling kind of across the board.
right, right,
And, that's why we missed those kids. That's why people didn't notice them because they were doing okay academically. So I got other things to deal with. I got this other thing going on over here. I'm not paying attention to the girl who's watching the butterflies because she's not giving me a problem. And I like
right.
her. She's very nice. So she's okay. We'll let her go.
Yeah,
Which is not good in the long run. But it is something that we're seeing. And I know that you and I are going to, after we finish talking about you, we're going to do another episode where we kind of talk in general about ADHD. So I think, you've kind of described what I think is your superpower is being able to process a lot of information that's coming at you from a lot of different people. You mentioned meditation. So is that your primary way of kind of rebooting?
yes, meditation. I reached meditation, I think maybe 20 years ago, when and again, it was emotional regulation. It's what can I do to help myself with emotional regulation, because I ride a pretty big horse, as I say, like emotionally. And so I found meditation to be incredibly helpful for me. It's like very grounding, very centering. And actually, the reverse is also true. So it'd been about a year and a half since I last meditated. And I really took some time to think about that. And I think part of the challenge for me was that I didn't want to hear what I would say in the quiet. And
Ah,
so that's also very telling as well. You know what I mean? It's
mhm.
like, well, why haven't I meditated in a year and a half when I know that I love it, when I know that it's really helpful to me, and especially with my ADHD, it's a reset, and that's what I need.
Well, it sounds like you are very in tune with yourself and certainly with the other folks in your life. And I would suspect that the experiences that you bring are going to be really helpful to some of the folks that you coach, because the reality is there's lots and lots of folks out there in corporate America, especially higher up on the
Right.
chain, who probably have very similar background to yours.
Exactly. And I think what I want to do is share as much a sense of pride as anything else. I
Mhm.
was like, I'm very proud of my younger self for
Yeah.
finding different ways to study, different ways to, get ready for exams, different ways to do, multiple different things. And I'm also high functioning, which means that I can always envision how I want my life to be. I want to be on time. I want
Mm.
to, like, what would my life be like if I didn't have time blindness or task blindness, right? What
Uh-huh.
would I do if I could just be at places when they kicked off, like everybody else? And so that's always the back and forth that I think now comes into play, that I have to keep reminding myself. It's like, but be proud of getting here
Yeah.
uh, when thinking about moving forward.
Yeah. And I think, there's an easy way and there's a hard way to do stuff. And sometimes, unintentionally we end up on the hard way, but other times we intentionally pick the hard road, maybe because we don't realize that there was a shortcut. Um,
Yeah.
we are actually getting really close to running out of time.
Okay.
So I am going to thank you very much for sharing your personal experiences with us, and let the audience know that the next episode of Universally Unique will be Robert and I again, and we are going to talk primarily about an ADHD diagnosis in boys of color. So after you've listened to this, a couple weeks will go by, and then you can hear the next episode that we do. So I very much appreciate your willingness to join us today, and I will see you for the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Universally Unique, exploring the neurodiverse world of the extraordinary. Join me, Dr. Lori, on Transformation Talk Radio every second and fourth Monday at 11:30 Pacific Time as we continue to explore navigating a world not designed for diversity. For advocacy and support for individuals with disabilities, let's connect. Learn more about consulting and life coaching at notoholisticconsulting.com.